Hello and welcome to the Moss Adams Virtual 2023 Building Opportunity Conference. We're pleased that you've all joined us today. And before we begin, I'm going to play a brief housekeeping video.
Welcome and thanks for joining. We're pleased to present our continuing professional education webcast series. Before we begin, please keep the following in mind. You can customize how you view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top right of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons that relate to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF of today's slides from the Slide Deck and Handouts widget. You can ask questions by typing in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. Today's session offers 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy requirements. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of polling questions. To participate in the polls, please check the button next to your answer within the slide window and click Submit. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon in the CPE Progress widget and download your CPE certificate. Don't worry if you can't download your CPE certificate today. We'll email you a copy in 2 weeks. If attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our group CPE attendance sheet, available in our Slide Deck and Handouts widget to receive credit. Please have all group members sign it and send only 1 sheet per group. CPE credit can only be awarded to participants registered as themselves and isn't available for participants who view the on-demand version. This presentation is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
All right, this is the third of 5 sessions in our 2023 Building Opportunity Conference. We have added a link to the conference sessions in the handouts window, so hopefully you can join us for the remaining 2 as well. Today's topic is Design Office Buildings for a Radically Changing World. Presenters Duncan, Lyons and Darrel Fullbright of the global architecture firm Gensler will discuss how next-level amenities, ESG, adaptable spaces, and flexible systems will be key to the commercial office rebound. Duncan and Darrel, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us today. My name is Darrel Fullbright, and I'm one of the global practice area leaders for Gensler. We're a global design firm all across the world. And we have a series of practice area expertise, one of which is office buildings, which Duncan and I both lead. And as part of that, we get together and talk about what are the things that are affecting change and what are affecting the future aspects of our business. And based on that, we put together, with the help of a lot of our regional leaders from around the globe, this package called Design for a Radically Changing World. And it's really about how to make office buildings stay relevant in this new era. Duncan, do you want to say a minute about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Darrel's partner. I am also a global leader of our office developer practice area. So we work with a lot of developer clients on office buildings, which, as you all know, there's not a ton of those starting new right now, but there's a ton of them, you know, that are still in our cities and markets, and you know, some of them are experiencing significant vacancy, and so we're trying to work with our clients to figure out how best to deal with them. So we've kind of put a deck together here that really we think addresses some of the issues that are keeping our clients up at night, and you know, are relevant to the current state of the market, and we're going to go through that for you and hopefully answer some questions.
Amy's going to start us off with a polling question.
All right, thank you. So the first of the 4 polling questions is, what industry do you represent? And your options are commercial real estate, construction, hospitality, architecture and engineering, or other. And the polling questions are located on the slides, so please make sure you have your slide window open. And then you're going to click the button next to the answer you choose and make sure to hit submit. All right, most have responded. We'll do another 5 seconds to make sure you can get your CPE. All right, here are the results.
Fantastic. We're going to move on here. So there are 5 top drivers for today's office buildings. One we're calling flight to experience, which is all about really elevating an experience-based design in the office and in the cities and areas that the office buildings sit. This idea of community and mixed use, which is really about vibrant communities and neighborhoods that are more than just office destination districts. This idea of path to net zero, which talks a little bit about how do we get to more resilient buildings, which is being driven by a lot of our clients' goals and objectives with their corporate portfolios. And then the fourth one is this idea of a perpetual asset. We know that buildings are going to be standing a lot longer than they used to be, and because it's the right thing to do from a carbon and from an offset perspective. So how do we design them with that thinking in mind? And the final one is adaptive reuse. How do we take the existing building stock that we have and make sure that we can adapt it to different uses based on changing need?
So each of these topics could sort of be their own presentation, but we're going to try to power through all of them and talk about what the main issues are and what our clients are seeing as really the relevant themes here that as far as they relate to commercial real estate in the U.S. So the first section we're calling flight to experience. We used to talk a lot about the flight to quality that we were seeing in many of our markets. And that was really where we were seeing real estate deals where, tenants that were maybe in a Class B building were moving to a Class A building, or tenants in a Class A building were moving to a trophy class building. And this idea that one of the things we're seeing today is that the deals at the top of the market are the ones that are more likely to go through, and that, in some cases, tenants are actually leasing less space than they had before, but higher quality space. So that's where really this idea of the flight to quality comes. And one of the things that we're saying is that, office developers and owners need to offer spaces that are comfortable, convenient, and inspiring, and that the flight to quality has kind of become the flight to experience. So what do we mean by that? The experience of coming to work in an office building occurs at many levels, right? It can actually occur at the level of the neighborhood, at the level of the community that you're forming within and around an office building, and even at the scale of the individual. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we mean by the experience that an office building is delivering at all of those scales. But really, the bottom line here is that, everyone worked at home during the pandemic. Not everyone, but a lot of people did. And what we're finding is that, returning to the office, the thing that's important is the experience that building delivers, because it needs to deliver experience that you can't get when you're just working at home. And that has to do with, really being part of something bigger, being part of a community, and having that sense of belonging. So starting with that notion of the scale of the neighborhood, right? One of the things that we're seeing is that office buildings that have neighborhood amenities in abundance are more likely to be attracting people back into the office. And that could mean access to transit, so that, getting back to work is more convenient. Or it could be, the quality of the amenities around the building. It could be that, what it really comes down to is how connected is your building to that community around it. This particular example is a project where the building amenities are opened up. There are movable walls that open up and connect, in this case, a coffee shop out to the plaza. So the building tenants use this amenity, but other members of the community use it as well. So again, you're feeling like you're part of something bigger than just your office organization. And then also thinking about health and well-being in the workplace has become a lot more important now, I think, than it was before the pandemic. So the ability to control your environment and make sure that you're comfortable, that you have access to fresh air and light and views. These are all things that are important. And climate change is a big concern for many office tenants as well, and for many people. So we're saying it as the number 2 concern for Gen Zs and millennials in the workplace today. So having a building that is really caring for its residents and caring for the planet at the same time are both equally important considerations. And then finally, at the scale of the individual, buildings and amenities within those buildings that really contribute to elevated services for an integrated lifestyle. So really thinking about convenience and personal growth. So while you're at work, you can do other things as well. You can pick up your groceries, you can pick up your dry cleaning, you might be able to go to a class, really making all of these things available within proximity of your workplace, so that it becomes a larger and more integrated experience for a building user. So our next section really ties directly into what I was just talking about with the flight to experience, but it really comes down to where is your office building located. If you're part of a vibrant mixed-use setting, and you're already feeling like you're part of that larger community. And the idea of having an integrated lifestyle where you might actually live and work in the same area and recreate and have convenient amenities to you all in that place is something that many tenants are finding attractive. And I think that our research shows that a convenient location with great neighborhood amenities are equally important to the amenities within the building, and that most tenants want to be back in the office, but they'd rather skip the commute to get there. So office developers and building owners are really sort of faced with a choice if this is the kind of environment that they want to create. They can put the building in the city, or they can put the city in the building. And what do we mean by that? We mean that all of those amenities and those different uses coming together in a neighborhood, or in some cases even coming together in a building. We're doing projects now which are vertical mixed use, where we might have residential, hospitality, office, retail, all of these functions even within a single structure, so that the building really becomes this vibrant sort of living community that offers all of these experiences in one place. So what's the value proposition for this mixed use concept, right? The idea that, you're inviting the community in, you're contributing to and making memorable places, memorable neighborhoods, you're serving a purpose and being a good neighbor, and that you're creating environments for shared spaces, because really people are coming to the building for those shared experiences that they don't get while they're working at home. So here's just a few examples of those things. This is actually the project I showed earlier, but Marriott International moved their headquarters, spent an enormous amount of time and money moving their headquarters 4 miles in Maryland. And the reason they did that was because they were in an isolated suburban community, and they moved their headquarters to a vibrant urban setting, close to metro, great neighborhood amenities. And then they actually took the amenities of their office building and the hotel that we built adjacent to it, and they made those all connected and opening up together into this central plaza space. So it really became a new urban destination within the community, and was a part of that notion of inviting the community in. Some projects are developed as catalysts, right? This is a project in Costa Rica where we designed a government campus, but not an isolated campus. Again, putting the campus in a existing urban setting, a mixed-use setting, so that it really would help to spur economic development within that part of the city and really create a more interesting, a more vibrant, and a more memorable neighborhood. What do we mean when we say being a good neighbor? This project is in Wynwood in Miami, and that's really the artist district, the most exciting artist district in Miami. And so we actually designed the building with a series of cafes and art galleries within the office building, and then also use the decks of the parking structure as kind of a blank canvas for artists to actually come in and produce murals. So really keying into what is unique about a neighborhood and playing that up in the design of the building is a way to be a good neighbor and to really support the community. And then finally, as I mentioned before, this idea of multiple uses within the same development. This is actually a project, the E-Center is a project in Beijing, but you can see it incorporates residential, office, food and beverage, co-working, there's a grocery, there's parking. My personal favorite is there's even a plastic surgeon's office, so you can get a little nip and tuck, while you're going about your other activities during the day. But really putting all of these things together, so you're really creating a little city within a single development. And that's really where we see the advantage of mixed-use buildings and mixed-use communities being better attractors for office building tenants. So speaking of office building tenants, one of the things that we're finding with our building owners and developer clients is that they're getting a lot of interest from tenants and also from investors that are committed to pretty aggressive ESG goals. And this idea of if you have a tenant that has set goals that they want to be net zero operationally, or that they want to decarbonize their corporate footprint, they need a building that will support them and will help them to meet those goals. And similarly, for investors, if you have financial partners in a deal, many financial partners now are looking at setting ESG goals as well, because they involve less risk, and they're considered safer long-term investments than other market goals that are not specific to ESG. So, if you can deliver a net zero building, you're supporting your investors and you're also supporting your tenants in meeting their goals. So. We're going to pause here, and on this topic of ESG, we wanted to add a polling question at this point.
All right, thank you. So the second polling question is, assuming your company has ESG goals, how committed are your local teams to implementing the vision? And then this one is a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest. And then there is an option of other. And if you click other, I'm curious what that would be, and you could put it in the Q&A window for us to see. So a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest, how committed are you to the ESG goals?
We really
and while
just
you
wanted...
respond, oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. Oh, no, I was just going to say we really wanted to just sort of take the temperature of the group here and see how important this issue is to the collective that we have on our call today.
All right, and while people are still responding, I do want to let you know that you do have the option to submit questions for the presenters in the Q&A window. We do plan to have time towards the end to address these questions from the audience, so feel free to submit those as we go. And here are the results.
Okay. So the largest group is kind of in the middle of that range. Interesting. Okay. Well, let's continue on this topic. One of the things that we found is, while there's a lot of interest in meeting the challenges of the day, and there are a lot of groups that are aggressively pursuing their own ESG goals or have set environmental targets. A lot of times building owners and developers aren't really quite sure of what they can do with their existing buildings or with new buildings as they start. And so one of the things we wanted to do was put together kind of a simple 5-step program that you can sort of think about as you're thinking about a new project, or even as you're looking at an existing facility. So I'll go through these steps, and again, if you have questions, please enter them in the chat. But really, what this is based on is this kind of value-based decision tree, where the passive design strategies, the things that you can do that don't cost a lot of money but have a significant impact, are really the things that you want to be doing first. And then you want to think about the efficiency and the optimization of all of the building systems. And then to go beyond that, you have to really start thinking about active design strategies that are, a little bit more progressive, or a little bit more significant in terms of really getting to net zero. And those things tend to be the things that are a little bit more expensive, so you would tend to do those last if you were looking at how you might navigate this sort of process. So the first step we usually talk about is starting with climate, right? Thinking about the locality of the building or the asset that you're considering, and what you can do, to really understand the climate, to understand all of the the temperature range that you're dealing with, humidity, precipitation, wind, solar energy. Sometimes just the orientation of the building can make a big difference to its energy loads. And if we site the building intelligently, and then maybe think about the facades, and this is an example of a project in Portugal where we developed a shading grid that was also providing natural ventilation through hollow sunshade members. So there's strategies, again, that start with the easy steps of building orientation and then layer on these other steps to really reduce operational carbon. So that's one of the things that it's important to think about is, when you think about how you get to a low carbon future or decarbonize your asset, there's operational carbon and there's embodied carbon. So what we're talking about right now is operational carbon, and that's really primarily to do with reducing loads, reducing energy loads. And so one of the things that we talk about is if you can reduce the load by as much as you possibly can first, and that has to do, again, with the building facades, the orientation of the building. In this case, this happens to be a building which is in Southern California, and the owner chose to make all of the vertical and horizontal circulation within the building protected, but outdoor space. So all of these corridors and lobbies are actually outdoor space behind this kind of sunshade. So they're shaded, they're protected from the weather, but they're not air conditioned, and that was or heated. And so that's one way that they were able to really drive down the energy use of the building, really in combination with active strategies like rooftop photovoltaics, get toward that net zero goal for the project. Another thing that we're telling all of our clients is, if you want to decarbonize, electrify your building. The future really is all electric. If you can design a building that does not burn anything on site, meaning gas, natural gas, oil, propane, diesel, and you can make an all-electric building, then you're not necessarily going to be reducing your energy costs today, but as the grid that our building is connected to decarbonizes over time and we start to use more renewable power, you're setting your building up so that eventually it can be a net zero energy building because, or a net zero carbon building, because you're not using carbon-based fossil fuels as the energy source for your building. So going 100% electric, like this new project that we did for Adobe in San Jose, is a great way to set yourself up for a lower carbon future. And then also thinking about shaving the peak loads, you know, how your building performs over a 24-hour period. You know, can you do night flushing of the building, which uses less energy to bring fresh air into the building? You know, in this, are there other sources? In this case, this building in Wheaton, Maryland, actually has 17 miles of underground geothermal wells, over 200 wells underneath the building. And so it's really using the natural coolant in the earth to help cool the building. And then it has photovoltaic arrays on the top of the building to power the building. So it's using those active strategies, again, to really decarbonize and reduce the energy loads and the operational carbon for the building. And then the other thing that we also are considering is, you know, a life cycle carbon analysis of our projects. So we've talked about energy use and operational carbon. The other thing that's extremely important is embodied carbon. So some of the things that we're considering is using more mass timber for the structure of the building. A lot of the embodied carbon is in the building structure. So the extent to which that we can use wood instead of concrete is going to be very beneficial in terms of the embodied carbon. The wood in the building is actually sequestering carbon that might otherwise be released into the atmosphere. And even if you do have to use steel or concrete, using steel or concrete with a high recycled content and carbon cure concrete, which actually uses carbon as an additive into the mix, are all good ways to reduce the embodied carbon of the building. And then finally, you know, the power of biophilia. You know, again, going back to that issue of health and wellness, people feel better when they're around plants and green materials. It just makes a difference, right? And in addition to the way that people feel, just the fact that these plants are removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, supplying oxygen to the atmosphere, and very often can be incorporated into the stormwater management systems and can be used to retain and detain and clean and filter water as it arrives and leaves the site, are great ways to really take an integrated approach to landscaping. So it's not just about looking nice, but actually serving a purpose and improving the performance of the building at the same time.
We're going to talk about two more sections here, and you know, one of the things that we looked at quite a bit is there were some discussions around our group that asked the question: should we be building any new buildings when it comes to carbon in the environment? Because building buildings is a very carbon-intensive process, both the energy and the materials and all the things to do to build new buildings. When we might have a lot of buildings in our existing stock that just need to be repurposed. And so these last two sections talk a little bit about both the pre and the post repurposing of buildings. And when we brainstormed this idea internally, we said, well, if we are going to be building new buildings, we should be thinking about a longer lifespan for those buildings. If we're going to create the carbon and create the energy and create all of the things to do to create a new building, how do we make sure that that building has a longer lifespan? And that's why we started talking about these ideas of a perpetual asset. And can we think about building smarter so that as we build them, they are easier to adapt and more flexible to adapt, similar to the way, you know, a furniture system inside of an office space is designed to move around. How can we make buildings more flexible from that perspective? So that's what this idea of the perpetual asset is. And we started looking at things that could help with that. For traditional buildings have center cores, right? And those center cores can limit you to what you can do with that space. And usually the structural system is buried inside that center part of the building. And so we looked at an idea of what do you pull that structure and pull it out to the perimeter of the building, and therefore the interior of the building can be demolished or moved or modified for a variety of uses, many uses we may not even know today. The other thing that we connecting with some of the things that Duncan said earlier is this idea that rather than a restroom or an elevator being at the center of the building, we kind of want to have this idea of having people at the heart of the building, right? So they're communicating stairs. There are ways to take the core of a building and distribute it so that you're really seen and being seen in these connected spaces in between. This idea of people at the heart of the building rather than a core. And then the other thing, a couple other things that we were looking at was, we're seeing a lot of conversions to residential, and one of the impediments to that is this idea of a curtain wall. When you have a curtain wall in a building that is a glass system that sits outside of the structural system of the building that runs up from top to bottom, it's pretty hard to modify that. I mean, you can, but it's expensive, and you have to take the whole system down in order to do so. So one of the things we looked at is, we should be considering floor-to-floor glass unit systems, more of a window wall versus a curtain wall. And that allows you to either pull back the glass, to change a floor by floor when you want to convert something. But office buildings tend to have deeper spans, and by pulling in the glass line to convert to something like a residential or hotel, you can pull that glass line and create balconies and have shallower bay depths that are more aptitude for those types of uses. The other thing that we're really looking at and implementing in a big way right now is science buildings, right? And there's a big trend on sciences coming into office buildings. We're seeing conversion of office buildings to sciences, but in any of the markets that are some of the hubs for sciences, namely San Francisco, San Diego, Boston, New York, and Raleigh, we are not designing an office building that isn't ready to go science as well. And so things that sciences want, they don't really want balconies in portions of the building where labs are going to be. You can't compromise an experiment by opening up a door to a balcony. So having zoned floor plans that have lab uses on one side and more people-friendly indoor-outdoor spaces on the other are a way we're looking at that. And this is a project that we finished recently in San Diego called Aperture Del Mar. Moving forward, another way that we're looking at buildings being much more flexible in the future is modular design. This is a project that we're finished recently in Seattle, Washington for Citizen M. And Citizen M is pretty well known for doing modular hotels all over the world. And literally the hotel units are prefab, actually in this case over in Europe, and put on a boat and floated over and then installed into place. And all the finishes and everything are done inside that prefab unit. We haven't seen as much of that for office projects, but you can see in kind of the right-hand diagrams, there could be a series of these modules that come together. And what that allows you to do is to pull modules apart and to deconstruct buildings in more rational forms so that, again, you could have different uses, add density, reduce density, have more interconnections between indoors and outdoors. The next thing we're looking at is, a lot of clients want to customize, especially build-to-suit clients, want to customize their floor plates or their buildings to their specific use. And that's kind of the wrong direction if you look at real estate as a longer-term asset. The way I like to look at it is a company is either going to be so successful they're going to outgrow their building, and therefore they're going to need to either lease it or sell it to somebody else, or they're not going to be successful and they still need to retain that asset, that real estate asset. So we're promoting buildings that tend to be more flexible, less differentiated from a floor plan and from a shape perspective. But when we do that, we look at the overall site and say, how do we differentiate today and create these really unique sites that are of their context, of their environment, of their climate. That's how you differentiate the project rather than trying to do bombastic architectural pieces that may or may not work for a future use. The other thing we looked at, and this was right after, as the pandemic has come through, we've looked at the reality of hybrid work and parking. And, as we have less people come into the office on a full-time basis, more people remoting in or are using transit, we're seeing that parking ratios are coming down. And one of the things that we're looking at is what do we do? How do we convert some of those parking spaces into more usable space? Doubling up on those parking, especially between uses like residential and office, or hotel and office, because office uses those parking during the day and residential tends to use it during nighttime use. So having that sense of using those inefficiencies in parking to create new developments is something that we're seeing quite a bit, especially in these times where financing buildings is a really challenge. And when buildings are trying to refinance, they're trying to add value to their project. And some of the ways to do that is to show, maybe not build the density, but to do studies to show that they can get more density on their site, thus making their project more valuable from a real estate perspective. And then we're also looking at that in districts. So in Los Angeles, for instance, there are large CBD districts where we're looking at a series of parking structures that could be grouped together so that you can take the inefficiencies out of individual parking structures and then maybe take one of those down or use that site to mutually benefit a district for higher, better use than just parking.
And sometimes we may even see instances where the city or municipality will go in on the deal and say, okay, you're going to be providing parking for your office tenants, but we can also benefit from that parking for retail or for museums or for parks, and that can be something that gains more use from that parking, in evenings and weekends. So it really is putting the spaces to better uses.
So the final section I want to talk a little bit is about adaptive reuse, and we're seeing a lot of this. This is really big in the press and in the market. A lot of our clients are coming to us, particularly around office to residential. There's a sense that the B and C class residential buildings, particularly in some in urban cores that are more CBD districts where there is only office and not a lot of residential or other mixed uses, there's a lot of interest to convert those buildings. And there's a great saying by one of our colleagues who came up with this fantastic tool. We actually have a tool where you can rate buildings on their ability to convert based on bay depths, on location, walk scores. But the great saying by Stephen is that bad office buildings tend to make good residential buildings. And that is because they tend to be really older office buildings with narrower bay depths, smaller floor plates. And those are ones that, a lot of our office folks or office users are looking for bigger floor plates and being on one floor and being more connected than being, in a smaller building with multiple floors. But in addition to office or residential, we're seeing industrial office, we're seeing retail to office, we're seeing residential to hotel, we're seeing office to lab quite a bit, single use to mixed use. We're seeing historic building conversions. A big thing that we're seeing across the country is the post office in many markets is reassessing. You've all read in the press that the post office is having challenges constantly in making money. So one of the things they're looking at is their entire real estate portfolio as an asset. And so we're converting a lot of those old post office conversions into other uses. And then urban revitalization and infill. So a lot of different things happening on the adaptive reuse front. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Amy for another poll question.
All right, thank you. So the third question is, do you have an asset that you've considered converting to another use? And then it's yes or no. And then just a reminder, if you would like to receive CPE credit for today's webcast, you will need to respond to at least 3 of the 4 polling questions. And then also, please make sure to get your questions in for the presenters so we can address those towards the end.
These last 2 questions that came up from Kevin and Aaron are really good questions. We'll get to those. Let's make sure we get to those. And it looks like the majority is not considering a converting asset, and there are some challenges to that, so we'll talk about that in the Q&A section. All right, moving forward. This is a really interesting question I mentioned earlier. What if all the buildings we ever need have already been built and we should just be converting buildings to different uses? It's a good question, especially with this significant amount of vacancy, and not so much vacancy as much as underutilized office projects. Even though you may have folks coming in 3 days a week. So that leaves 4 days a week that the office is being underutilized. So there's lots of questions about how to maximize that, and are there too many buildings being built? So one of there are 4 key things that are key to repurposing. And one is value. A lot of buildings can create a really interesting, unique character by converting an old building. And this building on the right is called Upcycle, and it's literally an old office, an old warehouse that used to be off a railroad spur. And so literally converting into an office project and keeping one of the railroad cars in sight and making it an amenity makes it kind of unusual and very cool in Austin, Texas. And that talks a little about, cultural character, right? Adaptive reuse and revitalization is a great example of that. Embodied carbon, right? So the amount of carbon needed to convert a building from one use to another versus starting from scratch is significant. And then we talk a lot about analytics and conversion strategies. So unlocking value, right? It's really about being smart. Not all projects are really lent to be converted to all uses, and it depends on a lot of conditions: the market that they're in, the city that they're in, the seismic concerns that they may have, the authenticity that they might have, and the differentiated experiences. So there's lots of factors that go into deciding whether there's value in doing the conversion. And this is one of those, the one on the right and the upper right is one of those post office projects that I talked about earlier, which is, was a giant project. It was the Central Post Office in Chicago that has floor plates of 60 to 70,000 square foot floor plates and this giant roof. And so what we did is we came in and said, hey, how do we turn it into this very unique office environment? And we put one of the largest green roofs in Chicago on top of it. It became a huge amenity both for the city and for the building, and then created a series of amenities inside of it. And the buildings have a lot of character to themselves, by themselves. So, connecting to that community and really playing up on the value of the project that it had before you made the conversions is key to success. And then that idea of embodied carbon, right? So if we reuse as much as possible and build with as little as possible and use as much recycled and renewable materials as possible, and reusing some of the materials in the building for the design uses of the building, you can start to see a trend here, right? And then design for that future adaptation or reuse and potential disassembly, and then minimize waste to landfill. So there's a whole idea of this circular economy that really is captured in this building. And there's a great story to tell. If somebody moves their business or their company into one of these repurposed buildings, they have this great story to tell about how the building was created.
We have a project in London at the moment that Darrel and I were just looking at, that their goal was to say, they're doing a major repositioning, renovation of an existing office building. Their goal is to say nothing leaves the building. Every material that's in the building gets repurposed in some fashion. Even though the building will be transformed and really given a whole new lease of life, all of the materials that exist within it are being reused in some way, or ground up and turned into aggregate, or some way in which they're being repurposed to save on that embodied carbon.
And this is a very interesting project in LA, which was a retail mall that was empty. And one of our clients, that's in Pacific Properties, came in and said, and this was pre-pandemic a little bit, where they looked at it and said, this mall has these giant floor plates, this interesting indoor-outdoor space. Why don't we convert it to office? And they were successfully able to lease the entire thing to Google because it was in the key location on the west side of LA, right where Google wanted to be. And it was this, incredible asset in this incredible location that made more sense to repurpose it than it did to tear it down and start over. And it gave it that unique character. And it had this creative office effect to it that would be difficult or expensive to create in a new building. And it had these giant, large, hyper flexible floor plates. It had these huge floor to floor because it had retail floor to floor heights. Office floor to floor heights might be in the 13 to 15 foot range. Retail are in the 18 to 20 foot range. So having this incredible volume in the space was super, super huge. Lots of access to daylight. You can imagine all the storefronts needed access to center cores, which now become these great, incredible connections to daylight. It had this really nice indoor-outdoor connection, which is a big trend we're seeing in offices. And then it had this giant parking availability because of the mall conversion of it. So it made a lot of sense to convert retail to office in this condition. And then, office to labs. We're seeing a lot of office to labs. There are challenges to this. One of the biggest things is floor-to-floor heights. Labs need more floor-to-floor heights. They have things like floor loads that they need to maintain, and things like vibration control. They need to be able to control hazardous materials and have hazardous materials in the building, which requires a different type of construction. So there's a lot. It's very intricate of converting office to labs. We're seeing a lot of folks trying to do that and are successful in a lot of markets. The interesting thing about office to lab conversion is there tends to not be any seismic concerns because the use is not really a major change of use. So there are some pluses and minuses, but it's a highly technical aspect to convert office to labs. And then office to residential, we're seeing an immense amount of office to residential. We're doing a lot of studies. We're not seeing as many of the studies go forward to full-blown designs, but we're seeing an immense amount of interest to study office to resi conversions, particularly in those CBD districts like San Francisco, where there might be a district that has virtually no residential use into it. And so to bring people back into those neighborhoods and create a vibrant community, you need to convert some of those office buildings to residential so people have a live, work, and play 24-hour city in those neighborhoods. So we're seeing a lot of interest in that, and we'll talk a little bit about in the Q&A on the viability, the financial impacts of that as well.
Then, one of the things on that, Darrel, if I can just interject, is when you do go into a central business district where maybe you have monolithic office use, right? It's a single-use district, and you convert some of those buildings to residential. You're bringing more residents into the city, into an area where you're really extending the life of the city. It becomes, instead of it being the 8-hour city, it becomes the 18-hour city now. So you're attracting new kinds of retail that it can be supported by both office users and residential users. So not only are you increasing the value of the buildings you convert, you're actually increasing the value of all the other office buildings that you don't convert, because they are now going from being in a single-use district to being in a mixed-use district, which our research has shown and national statistics have shown, are seeing less vacancy and higher rents than single-use districts. So there's a bunch of sort of collateral benefits to that kind of office to residential conversion.
And the government's taking notice. They're coming out with incentives for building owners to look at buildings and to convert them both through a city, national, and state aspects, because they realize that cities that are not attracting people to their urban cores are losing tax bases. And so there's financial incentive for cities to do this at a citywide scale. I'll jump into our last slide here, and then we'll jump into some questions. One of the interesting things is this project called Gusto, and this is an old warehouse building on the wharf in San Francisco. And you can see the incredible character and volume and other things that this can create for an office user. It's not for every office user. This is a high tech company that does remote HR and other things from a tech perspective. But you can start to see how that character, you would never be able to build this character from new. So having that unique and authenticity in existing structures can be a huge benefit from an industrial to office conversion factor. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Amy for one last poll question, and then we'll talk about some questions.
All right, thank you, Darrel. So the last question is, are you actively involved in a new project? If so, which category does it fall in? Hospitality, office, residential, industrial, other, or not applicable if you don't have an active new project. And then if you select other, feel free to drop that in the Q&A window so we can see what that is.
One of the things that we're seeing a lot is that, we believe that our client relationships are really key to the success of Gensler. And so when we're working with a developer client, we follow them. We go where they go. So if our office developers right now aren't developing office buildings, they may be developing residential or mixed use or retail or even going into industrial and logistics. And we're going with them. We're working on all of those project types as well. And, we recognize that at some point they may come back to be developing office, but at the moment, that's not the most active practice for our clients or for us.
And we're fortunate to have a large organization that has many spokes of expertise that we can bring, experts that that may not be us to every potential opportunity. All right. Looks like not a lot of people are on the sidelines, which is expected in this market. Financing is extremely difficult to come across.
Perhaps we should have asked, do you wish you were involved in a new project?
So, Carly, did you want to call up any of the specific questions that you thought might be appropriate to tackle?
Yeah, Carly's marking the ones that she wants me to verbally address with you. So let's go down the list here. So one of them is, how much weight are you seeing developers place on a contractor's ESG in the contractor selection process?
I think that depends on the client, but that can be a huge impact. I would say that it's not as prevalent, but it's going to become more prevalent as we move forward. I don't know what your thoughts are, Duncan.
Yeah, I would agree with that. What we're seeing in a lot of the East Coast markets where I'm most involved in new projects is that the larger general contractors have really got this figured out already. They've already figured out how to integrate construction waste recycling, and really look at how all of their construction practices are contributing to pollution, to noise, to other environmental issues, and many of them have director level positions of people that are responsible for meeting their clients' goals, but also for setting their own goals internally and really reducing their carbon footprints as well. So I think it kind of depends on the market, but also it depends, I think, on the size of the general contractor or construction manager. But many of the larger ones now are kind of fully on board with helping their clients meet their ESG goals through the construction phase.
And it's just going to become more and more prevalent as time progresses.
Sure.
We had a really interesting comment. We had a summit last summer, and we had an investor summit where we had a bunch of real estate investors, office real estate investors on the call. We asked them, how important is ESG to you? And one of the great comments that came away from that was, you either pay attention to ESG up front, or ESG will come back to haunt you in your long-term value. So I thought that was a really interesting impact.
All right, thank you. So another one is, for the suggested building reimagining you've presented so far, how many of these options are viable from an economic perspective? Meaning, does the cost outweigh the benefit? And how many owners are willing to invest the cost, even if the ROA doesn't immediately pencil out?
That's a
so
great question.
How are they justifying it?
Yeah,
That's a great
that's
question.
the crux of so many of the studies that we're doing right now is is it going to pencil out? And why don't I start this, Darrel, and you can
Yeah.
pitch in.
Yeah.
But as Darrel mentioned, on the office to residential conversion, which of course is just one of the conversion types that we're looking at, but we did develop this scoring tool, and what it does is it looks at all the physical characteristics of the building and its location and neighborhood and structural systems and floor to floor height, all of these things. There's 30 different data points that we put in, and it gives a weighted scoring of those data points in 5 categories, and then it'll give you a score in 5 categories and then an overall score, and that score is really intended to represent how viable a conversion would be to residential and how suitable that building is for that kind of conversion. But what it doesn't take into account, because we don't always know this, is the cost of the building, right? What you've got to pay to get it. And what we're finding is that, the financial side of it, the physical side of it, we can address. That's what we do as architects, right? We can solve a lot of the physical characteristics and challenges to convert a building. But getting the financial aspect to work out is often more difficult, because in many markets, the square foot rent that you're receiving for residential is less than the square foot rent for office. So at one level, you're asking building owners or investors to make a significant capital investment in order to convert a building in order to then receive less rent per square foot. Now, of course, the counter argument to that is if you've got a vacant office building, you're getting no rent per square feet, and that residential rents tend to be more stable, and that you're typically going to see higher occupancy and a larger regular income from rent after a residential conversion. So it's really a fine balancing act, and in the end, it comes down to how much you have to pay for the building, or what the value is of the loan, right? And what we're finding is that the projects that are successful conversions from a financial standpoint are very often projects where the value of the asset has dropped so much that in some cases it's almost just the value of the land, right? We believe there's still value in the structure, but as a viable office building, it almost has zero value, and those are the ones that are more likely to move ahead.
I think you basically covered it, right? It's as we're seeing values fall, we're seeing vacancy increase as those rents drop because of your vacancy. All of a sudden, the financial metrics change. The financial metrics that you were looking at a year ago or even 6 months ago may be shifting in a radically changing world, to tie back to our title. And as those shift, those metrics make different sense as you go through that. But generally, I think Duncan, you covered most of that.
Just to give you an idea statistically, Gensler has used this scoring tool to score a little over 960 buildings in various markets across the U.S. And what we found is that buildings that have an overall score of 80 or higher, so that's 80 out of 100, are physically viable conversion candidates. And of the 960, it's about 22% of all those buildings that are scoring in that 80 or above category that make them viable candidates. But if a building is a physically viable candidate conversion, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily a financially viable candidate. So of those 22% of the office buildings that are physically able to be converted, we're probably seeing, maybe 1 in 20 of those where the financial aspects of it actually pencil out and make it a really viable project for the building owner or the developer to move forward with.
It becomes even more challenging in California because we have seismic zones. And in many jurisdictions, in many cases, depending on how many residential units you are putting in, you change your risk category. And once you make a risk category change in the structural system, in other words, you have more people in the building than it was anticipated when it's first built, Many jurisdictions are requiring seismic retrofits. In other words, if you've got a building that was built in the 1960s or 1970s, that does not have the same resistance to earthquakes that a building that's today. And so those can be significant costs that can derail potential conversion projects early on.
All right. Well, thank you. And unfortunately, we are out of time, but thank you to those that submitted your questions. We will pull a list and do our best to follow up with you after the webcast. And then thank you, Darrel and Duncan, for a very interesting presentation. We truly appreciate it. And this was our third session of the 2023 Virtual Building Opportunity Conference. We hope to see you at our next one on October 25th, which is Capital Markets Update. And if you met all CPE requirements, your certificate is available to download now in the CPE progress window. A copy will be emailed within 2 weeks if you have difficulty downloading it now. And finally, here is a link to an online survey for today's presentation. Your feedback is always appreciated. And take care, everyone. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Darrel.
Thank you.
Thank you.